Hello, my name is Anselmo Bueno and I will be discussing the various causings of the American Revolution. Starting with the end of solitary neglect. It was a long-lasting British policy in the 13 colonies which allowed the colonists to flout or violate the laws associated with trade. They would break the laws and smuggle or trade according to their own way. The British policy of the solitary neglect was not documented, so they had no proof or any proof to enforce it. And then the British enacted the Navigation Acts to stabilize it, but they taxed way too much. So all this led to the 7 Years' War. It's also known as the French and Indian War, and it's not really start until Britain declares war with France in the early 1750s. French expansion into the Ohio River Valley repeatedly brought France to armed conflict with the British colonists. The Indians allied with the French because the Indians saw how advanced the French were with their weapons and the goods they brought with them. Plus, the Indians were in their homeland, so they knew a way around it, so they decided to merge together. At the end, in 1763, the British won, defeating the French, and this brought us to the Proclamation of 1763, when King George III, following Great Britain's acquisition of French territory in North America after the end of the French and Indian War, which forbade all settlements past the line that was drawn along the Appalachian Mountains. So the west of the Appalachian Mountains belonged to the French and the Indians, while the east belonged to Britain and the English. But later, they broke that act. They broke the proclamation because the colonies began to overpopulate. I'm sorry. They began to overpopulate, and they needed more land for expansion. So the Parliament Revenue Acts. It was an acts. They were acts of taxation. The Sugar Acts in 1763 and the Stamp Acts in 1765. These taxations were brought in to get money for the government because due to the French and Indian War they were really broke. Like just strictly down broke. So what they did was they taxed the sugar imports and the sugar that they would sell to make money out of it. Sugar was bought at high sugar was a high demand in Britain and the colonies. And so Britain decided to tax them for it. And the Stamp Act is the same, but instead they taxed papers, newspapers, and other commercial items. If they didn't have the stamp, it meant that they weren't like official. And the Boston Massacre was an incident of British soldiers who shot and killed English colonists. Now these colonists, they were just chilling, they were doing nothing too bad, and the soldiers who were supposed to be keeping watch so nothing like this happened were the ones that shot them. So these soldiers were tried in the colonies, and Samuel Adams was their lawyer. The Tea Act and Boston Tea Party. In 1773, the Parliament taxed all imported tea. They planned to stop the smuggling of tea to the country. The tea was consumed in a high quantity with the colonists, but they were not buying it from the merchants that the Parliament taxed. So they just decided to tax all tea that was imported into the colonies. So the Boston Tea Party was more like a rebellion attack against these taxes. The colonists dressed like Indians and dumped thousands of pounds of tea into the water near on the port. The battles of Lexington and Concord. These battles of Lexington and Concord in 1775 were the kickoff to the American Revolution. Tensions in the colony were built against the monarchy. The colonists won, and later these battles resulted into the Revolutionary War. In 1783, the colonists formally won their independence. The Olive Branch Petition. In 1775, a letter to King George III from the members of the Second Continental Congress, which represented the last attempt for a moderate party in North America to avoid war with Britain. It was signed by all 13 colonies, and it was technically the last warning they were going to give to Britain before they rebelled into the Revolutionary War. So, when the letter got there 6 months later, the king disregarded the letter and just went on with his regular life, with his reign of power. And this will resulted in the revolution. So Britain wasn't doing anything with the colonies. They were just taxing them. They were just getting the money from them because the colonies had their own government. They had their own way of ruling. They had their own laws. They had their religion. They did all this by themselves. And well, Britain was just stealing their money. And all this led to the America that we know today. It also says to choose whether we think that my bad, excuse me, that the American colonies and Britain was feasible, and I say no. I think that the only possible solution was gonna be independence, because either way, if they didn't rebel now, they were gonna rebel later because Britain was probably gonna enforce more taxations and more acts and more of this and that just hurt the colonists and wasn't making anything for them. And this is my visual aid. It's the French and Indian War.